I would start out, very rarely drinking, and then it would, increase to like, more often, or like I didn't care if it was a weeknight. I would drink, and then once I started smoking weed, it was at first you get really high when you smoke weed. So then you can then I was smoking weed like almost every day before school, and it's not a big deal, or you don't think it's a big deal. And once you do like coke, you can do that every day. You can do it every night. Ecstasy, for a while, I could do every day. I went to night school here after a while. I stopped going to day school and I went to night school, and I smoked crack before I went to night school. No one even knew what I was doing. They just thought I was zoned out and didn't want to be there at school. So, my frequency of doing drugs was basically every day.
We learning life's lessons while we blaze the cerebral lessons. A man but still a child, and I have so many questions. Struggle all my life to evade the misconceptions.
New at 5, an increase in drug overdoses right here at home. And it's not just street drugs anymore. An EMS chief tells us it's the worst he's seen in decades, especially among high school students.
We've seen a lot of fatalities lately, which is a little bit more unusual.
The amazing stuff about this is that you can play 36 holes on it in the afternoon, take it home and just get stoned at it, but Jesus.
Do you think pop culture glorifies drug use?
Definitely.
Hey, smoke weed every day.
Tons of rappers and stuff smoke weed, and everybody, and there's other music that everyone's smoking weed and thinks it's fine.
Marijuana is a gateway drug, and particularly in the teen population. I think that once you start with marijuana, then you're willing to try the next thing, and maybe it's going to be prescription drugs. Maybe, so then maybe you're going to take someone else's Ritalin, and maybe you're going to take somebody else's Percocet.
Well, it's not really great for you, and it probably kills your inhibitions. There's nothing in songs that say that, or pop culture.
I think it's kind of hard to tell our kids they can't do it when it's being legalized in so many places. It's got to be a confusing message for the kids.
Drugs are bad. For the vast majority of teenagers in the United States, this message will be dictated by their parents in one form or another. Why are teenagers so vulnerable to drug use? Is it the rise of drugs in mainstream and pop culture? Drugs are obviously a form of rebellion in the eyes of many. But do teens need to inflict self-harm in order to feel empowered?
Teenagers, it's a time in your life when you feel that kind of untouchable. It's also a time in your life where people are trying to find their way. They're experimenting with lots of things, not just drugs and alcohol. They're kind of experimenting with who they are. They're experimenting with their sexuality. They're experimenting, trying to find their way as far as what am I going to do with my life.
So drugs are bad, but the conversation is changing. Whereas merely 30 years ago, parents were encouraged to just say no.
Hey, I got some moves, man. Let's get blow, man. Let me just try something. Some real nice hops.
No, man.
Now, parents are more willing to let their children experiment and even use marijuana on a regular basis.
So I started smoking around my sophomore year of high school, and it took my mom about a year, and I was in my junior year, and I had, brought stuff in the house, and she had caught me, and she got fairly mad and stuff, but in the beginning, she gave me a second chance.
Well, my mom knows that I smoke, and my mom has told me several times in the past that as long as I'm not smoking in her house, she doesn't mind as long as I'm going to school and going to work and paying my car insurance, that I can make my own decisions, and she knows it's not harming me anyway.
The social acceptance of marijuana is obviously increasing. What does this mean for the overall rate of teenage drug use? A survey was given to almost every student in the school, which asked several questions about their experience with drugs. The survey showed that a mere 33% of the freshman class had tried drugs, while 77% of the senior class had tried drugs. If drugs are already so prevalent in our culture, then what does the legalization of marijuana mean for the future?
Part of emergency medicine is to take care of whatever comes in the door, and I think certainly issues that have to do with drugs are something that we see.
Dr. Chin is a medical doctor who's experienced drug abuse and drug addiction firsthand in his work.
The legalization of marijuana is really a very interesting subject because it's really a number of different issues. It's societal, it's political, because there's a lot of, it touches on a number of topics. From a medical perspective, the question really is, at least to me, is does the use of marijuana act as a gateway drug to the use of other drugs, what many people would say harder drugs, if you want to use that word?
I believe that any substance, when it is abused, is a gateway.
Ms. Krasowski has some pretty strong opinions on marijuana as a gateway drug, but is that always true?
I would say that I would encourage people to make their decisions by going out and trying to find data and studies to answer that question. Certainly there are examples in the world where marijuana has been legal for a time period where there's enough data to be collected to determine does that really happen.
That kind of data does exist, all the way in Portugal.
8 years ago in Portugal, the law was changed so that possessing or using any illicit drug was no longer a crime.
All drugs, regardless of their level of addiction, were legalized. Does this mean that Portugal has fallen apart since this law was passed? Has the horror of drugs wreaked its havoc on Portugal?
Drug deaths here have fallen, drug-related infections are down, and official figures show overall drug consumption is down 10%.
So it's not that simple. It's not as clear as just say no. It's a very complicated subject. Students would be better off if they were taught about how complicated the issue is. At Housatonic, drug-related incidents continue to occur.
Some smart freshmen decided to show off some other freshmen or classmates some of the marijuana they had.
And then they all ended up going to the APO.
And one of the kids, I guess, sent home, and the other two that were there didn't have anything on them after they were searched.
There are so many conflicting opinions about marijuana and drug use in general.
I do think that marijuana is a gateway drug to these other drugs.
I don't think there's any one thing that you can pinpoint on saying, well, this is going to make the kids do drugs. I think they were already going to do it, or it's their unique situation that leads them to drugs.
Drugs continue to permeate through many parts of society, affecting teenagers' experiences at high school.
But as a freshman, I've walked in on kids doing cocaine.
When I walk around, it looks like there's a lot of drugs here.
The situation is complicated and difficult to navigate. No one can truly give a correct answer, for there are no correct answers. Just remember, it's a gray area. Nothing is simple. It's up to you to make the choice.